just wasn't there. And I've got this view that the the nomination of Donald Trump was the end of the establishment of the Republican Party. The election of Donald Trump should have been the end of the establishment of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Did the establishment of the Democratic Party, fight off Bernie Sanders, who I think is as close to a populist as you could get, to survive? Or is there another wave coming? And did the anti-populist forces of history, when you studied them, did they play the race and class divisions the way we're seeing those splits today?
Oh, wow.
Really
so many good questions there, Rich. How should we, the answer to the last one first, the race and class divisions, oh my God, yes, but not the way we're doing it, that it's being done today. I mean, very, very much the opposite. So they played on those divisions, but in a sort of racist way. So one of the very interesting things about populism, and historians are fascinated by this, is that it was strong in three regions of America: the far west, which didn't have a lot of people in it, the Great Plains area, Kansas, Dakotas, Nebraska, Texas, and then in the South. And these are all areas with a lot of farmers. And populism was very strong in the South. And the South at the time was, very poor. Everyone was a farmer, but there was a very strong ruling elite who were identified at the time. This is a white ruling elite, the planter class, who were identified with the Democratic Party at the time. They called themselves Bourbon Democrats. And populism went into the South and actually grew up in the South and said, this is our appeal to voters of the South. This is in the 1890s now. And in a lot of Southern states, Blacks could still vote. They hadn't been disenfranchised yet. None of that stuff had happened yet. I mean, it had happened a little bit in some of the states, but not in all of them. And so populism went into these Southern states and said, Southern politics at the time was dominated by racist appeals, to white people. It was this idea they called white solidarity, the idea that the only thing that mattered was the color of your skin. And so white people had to stick together as a race, show solidarity as a race. Poor white farmers voting for the party that was controlled by the people who owned the South. That's white solidarity. Populism went into the South and said, no, your interests as a farmer are more important than your interests as a white person. And on that basis, we're going to reach out to Black voters whose interests are the same as white farmers, and reach out to them and try to build a coalition based on class interests rather than on racial interests. And this was absolutely shocking. As you might imagine, this was, this challenged the Southern system at its very heart. And things like this had happened before in the South, and there was a kind of a constant threat beneath the surface that poor whites and poor Blacks might get together and realize their common interests. And so
it seems we're seeing a little bit of this today as we're getting.
Oh yeah, this is a constant theme in American life.
Our ancestral history. Oh, you're a person of this color, or you're a person of this heritage. You have to think this way. We're going to put you in this box with everyone else, and don't talk to these other guys. And I look at that and go, okay, well, who wants us to not talk to folks like that? Because I know, lots of people that would fit in multiple of those boxes, and my friendship circle covers a lot of them. And we all agree that our government today is not doing a very good job. And frankly, everybody's more than concerned about the surrendering of privacy, and very concerned about the amount of power that the big tech monopolies wield.
Yeah.
And we could get into talking
about.
Well,
let me finish this story, and then I'll come to that, if you don't mind. I mean,
please do. No, I love this. I love where you're going here. This is great.
So basically, the Southern elite came down on populism like a ton of bricks, with all kinds of racist appeals, And they, in one state, I mean, populism, they basically defeated them everywhere except in North Carolina. That was the only southern state where the populists won. And they made an alliance with the Republican Party, which was a small party at the time in southern, and that was a party that black voters tended to be loyal to. And they came together and they won, and they elected a governor, sent people to Congress, U.S. senator, et cetera, took over the state legislature, all that stuff. And they did a lot of the things that populists do. They allowed local, home rule in cities around North Carolina, which meant that suddenly in areas where blacks were in the majority, they were electing governor, city governments and stuff like that. And this was just intolerable. And the local elite came at them in the year 1898 with something they called, and this is famous, this is all over the sort of, well, actually it's famous, but it's something people don't like to talk about because it's very uncomfortable what happened next. It was called the White Supremacy Campaign. They actually called it that. Yeah, I know. The White Supremacy Campaign.
Truth in labeling here?
Yeah. Well, it was just insane. And they brought in all of these racist speakers from all around the South. They brought in, they built a militia, a racist militia. They were called the Red Shirts. Went around. I know it's like the brown shirts, right? But they were called the Red Shirts. They went around, intimidating voters, shooting voters, frightening people, and then a campaign of hysteria, in this case, racist hysteria, directed against populism and against the Republicans. And they did it. They won. This is in 1898, and they take control of the state legislature, and they do two things immediately. The first one is they disenfranchise black voters and a lot of poor whites. And people have studied, this is the beginning of Jim Crow. And so people ask, where did Jim Crow come from? It didn't just develop, hasn't been around forever. It was developed deliberately to make sure that populism never happened again. This is why they
separate the races.
And make sure they are not friends. Make sure that they don't get back together and try this again. And this is I'm generalizing, and in some southern states it happened before populism, in some states after populism, but in a bunch of them it was they did this deliberately to stop populism, and they took the vote away from black voters all over the South. And it's a terrible story. And in North Carolina, it actually ended in a really bloody manner, where in one of the cities there, in Wilmington, North Carolina, the local Democrats armed themselves and marched into the city, and they had a Republican mayor, and they chased him out of office. They had a populist police chief. They chased him out of town. They went through the black part of town, shooting and burning. They burnt down, there was a black newspaper in the town. They burnt it, destroyed it. Killed a bunch of people, and they took over the government of this town. This town had it's a city actually, had an elected government, and they overthrew it. And it's apparently the only time there's been a successful military coup in America since the Civil War. It's the craziest story. I didn't even know this story until I started writing the book.
I'd never heard of it.
And it's again, it's an uncomfortable story, and people don't like to talk about it, but you can find the research on it. It's out there if you dig, and it's an incredible tale. Anyhow, that's what happened to populism, and it's ironic that the word that these guys invented to describe themselves, populist, that this word later they flipped the meaning of it and made it a synonym for racism. And by itself, that's a very long story, and I want to get to the Guardian article. And I
want to get to the Guardian article. But just two other quick things that when I hear you going through that, and I can't help but going back to the 2016 election and its aftermath, and we agree that we ended up with a bad president. But the thing that struck me is that following the 2016 election, there was like a doubling down. This is the party that said, a certain part of your voters are deplorable, they're irredeemable, they're not worth appealing to. And following the election, instead of saying, hey, we missed something, we need to go to Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and find out we missed something. There was like almost like a doubling down of, well, wait a minute. They really proved how dumb they are and how misinformed and how emotional, because it wasn't a problem with we, the Democrats. It was a problem with you, the voters, aren't good enough or smart enough to vote for us.
And people said that. They said exactly what you just described, that you are not exaggerating. There's a whole chapter of The People Know. It's the last chapter of the book, is filled with quotations from leading pundits and thinkers saying exactly that, that the problem is not that the Democrats failed the people, it's that the people failed the Democrats. Which is like, whoa, you know, that is so upside down. I just want to take a step back. Hillary Clinton made the famous or the notorious deplorables remark, and right away figured out that she'd put her foot in it, that this is not something that a politician who's counting on, you know, in a democracy, this is not something that a politician should say. And she tried to take it back. You remember she tried to get out of it and apologize for it. But what's fascinating to me is that so many of the thinkers and supporters of the Democratic Party were like, no, that was exactly right.
It was a prepared remark. She did it twice.
Yeah, I know. But she realized very quickly what a blunder that was. But the thing is that so many of her supporters were like, no, that was not a blunder. That was exactly right. And they have, when you say doubled down on it, I think they've done considerably more than that. It's like people want to identify, you know, not just to say that Donald Trump was a bad president, which I think he was, but that people who voted for him were sinful. Or they were depraved in some way for having done that. And you know, I think a lot of them probably are bad people. That's probably true. But there's 70 million of them. I know people. I know personally people who voted for him. I know they're not bad people. They may have been deceived. You know, they voted for a guy who was a lousy president. I didn't vote that way. But to attack the people, you know, for making a wrong decision, I think is such a strange turn. And yet, like you say, doubling down on it, the Democrats then proceeded to invent all sorts of excuses for why they lost in 2016, rather than look this thing in the face and say, you know, look, we lost Wisconsin. That one really blew my mind, because I don't know if you've ever been to Wisconsin.
Many times,
like
yeah.
Madison, Wisconsin. This is a pretty liberal state. This is a state with a very liberal history. This is the home of the La Follette family, etc. Michigan, you know, that one hurt. Pennsylvania, that's, you know, that's you know, all of these things. Iowa, you know, this astonished me that this happened. And it was obviously a wake-up call to the Democratic Party. Look, you know, read, listen, liberal, see where you've gone wrong. How have you lost the confidence of these people that used to be your rank and file, used to be your you know, your core support? This was your base. This was the base of the party, and you've lost them. You know,
if I could pile on to a little bit of what you're saying, that, and I will tell you this, in 2016, I didn't vote for either of them. I wrote myself in because I thought they both were terrible presidents. And I lost, by the way. The number of people that voted for Donald Trump, basically, they thought that this, you know, what more could go wrong? You know, a big middle finger, all those reports that you cite about how they doubled down on insulting the very voters. And then I kind of look at this today, where we have this speech suppression, and a misinformation campaign coming out around what's in voting bills and the like. And I think that's just the next step.
It's closely related. It's closely related, because if you're, by the way, and I want to exempt Joe Biden from everything that I'm about to say, and there's a bunch of Democrats who I really like, and who Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't know about Biden. Jury is still out on him. I mean, he's brand new as president, but you know, there's a lot of Democrats in the world.
He's the fresh face of politics.
Yeah, exactly. Fresh face 78-year-old. Yeah. Anyhow, but if you're a party and you've just been handed this this sort of shocking defeat. Remember, every pollster said that Hillary was going to win. The New York Times said it was 95%. You remember all this?
Oh, sure.
And so then the unthinkable happens. And if you are determined to not look in the mirror and not do a post-mortem and not figure out where you went wrong, but instead you're going to, do these other things. You're going to blame Russia. You're going to blame, you're going to blame all sorts of external actors.
Yeah, you're gonna. Well, and look, you and I could probably go on for hours about that, because I thought if the Democrat, and I said it over and over again, I said if the Democrats would have just acted like adults and played it straight, people would have seen how bad Trump was, and the fact that they didn't just gave Trump cover. And that's all it did. And when you come out like the non-whistleblower, right? There is no whistleblower. Okay, they're non-existent. If you look at the document that Adam Schiff brought forward, it is overly lawyered. Okay, and it didn't come from some strange guy that thought he saw a problem. But the Russia piece.
Well, some of it was true. I mean, the Russians did buy ads on Facebook, right? We know that, and the ads are actually kind of interesting if you want to look at them. But to blame the entire election on that is ridiculous, and to blame the election results on that is silly. And they never did show that Trump was a Russian agent or whatever the hell it was that they were trying to, the collusion.
Yeah, I mean, they had every resource available.
Oh, I know. I don't really want to go into that now, because I'll tell you something. I never wrote about that all those years when that was the only news story. I never wrote about it. I never, it just was not my thing. And I was like, this doesn't ring true to me. It feels like someone trying to invent an excuse, for.
Yeah. And when I watched that, I said, well, with the amount of money, the time, the access, including breach of client attorney privilege, being able to give out, non-prosecution agreements, there's something there. They're going to find it. Yeah. I thought the premise was a little weird. Like, here's a guy who's in his 70s, been in the public eye most of his adult life, wants to become president, and says, yeah, Russia's the way to go. I mean, okay. I guess that I'm like,
it could happen. It could happen. Yeah. But anyhow, so it didn't, turns out it didn't happen. I remember being relieved when Mueller, when his report came out and saying, oh, thank goodness the president is not a Russian agent.
That was a bad day for a lot.
No, but I was really happy. That was like, that's good news. I've been, all these dire reports on TV, that were very scary. And all of a sudden it turns out it's not true. And it's funny because I've learned since then that I think I'm the only one in America that reacted that way.
Yeah, it's and I'm nerdy enough to watch C-SPAN and what was done with the FISA court and what the Inspector Horowitz's report was in it. And I'm not, I kid you not, when they caught, so Comey, Sally Yates, Rod Rosenstein asked under oath at Senate Intelligence Committee, if you knew now, then what you knew now, would you have signed those FISA warrants? All of them answered no. And no one asked the follow-up question, well, what did you know today that you didn't know now then? Because the answer is just that we got exposed. So this is and the reason they said that it wasn't politically motivated, and I kid you not, was that the IG, following his first report, they pulled 25 random cases of appeals to the FISA court, and most of them the FBI had lied on. And so the answer was, you see, we do this to everybody. We weren't just going after Trump.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm not a big Russiagate expert. I learned years ago, I wrote about Iran-Contra, and I remember interviewing this guy who was a great expert on Iran-Contra. This is in the Wrecking Crew. I got really interested in Iran-Contra for reasons that don't really matter anymore. But at one point, I was talking to this guy and the conversation ballooned and went on much longer. And I said, this is really interesting. He said, yeah, but you should stay away from it. People come into this, people get interested in Iran-Contra and they start studying it and they never come out again. They go into the maze and they never come out again because they get drawn into it, and they think it's so fascinating. And so I try to stay away from things like that. But the stuff about censorship, this is what's happening now. And it is real. This is, when I first started looking into this, I said, this can't be true. I'm a liberal. I've been a liberal for a long time. Liberals believe in free speech. Liberals believe in protecting the speech, even of viewpoints they hate, because we know that's the principle. That's how the conversation works in America. Every viewpoint is allowed its say, and then the public gets to choose from amongst this wide array of choices. And we also know that if we were to, this seemed obvious to me, that if you start if you start censoring people or start shutting down certain viewpoints, they're going to come after you, liberal. They're going to come after people like me. I know this. My views are extremely unpopular in this country. And there's a long history of whenever there's been a censorship regime in this country, and it's happened a couple of times, it's always people on the left who are the target. During World War I, remember the hysteria I was talking about with populism, again, in the McCarthy era, it's always people like me who are on the receiving end of these things. So that's not something that we ever fool around with. And then I start reading, in the New York Times is calling for Joe Biden to appoint, what do they call it, a reality czar?
Sure, exactly.
It sounds Orwellian.
It's college speech codes elevated to a federal level, and so we
yeah.
have
There is one difference now between censorship regimes in the past, and that is that they have the tool to do it, which never existed before, and that's social media. And they can see the power that social media has, and it's scary. It bothers me. I think these companies are monopolies and need to be broken up or regulated as monopolies. But the Democrats, a lot of Democrats, not all of them, of course, but a lot of Democrats say the opposite. We want these companies to start pushing the mute button on our political opponents. And they're open about this. This is not a secret. This is really happening.
Yeah, and they're trying to convince their base that it's a good thing. And my argument to that is, okay, if we give someone the power to mute, what if we elect another Donald Trump? Now he's got the power to mute.
Yes. Yeah. That is a very good concern. That is a very worthwhile concern.
And as a historian, we had a man on, Professor Dan Crane, who's at the University of Michigan Law School. His specialty is antitrust. And what got me really interested in having him on the show is that he wrote a number of papers about the rise of fascism when there's monopolies. And he goes back to pre-World War II Germany. And he says, okay, Germany had 2 airplane companies, 2 pharma companies, 2, of each. Hitler just compromised those, controlled the entire economy. Fast forward, here we are, 2021. We've got Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Microsoft.
Yeah.
They, I don't know.
They control the place.
Exactly.
It is terrifying. And look, part of populism was the fear and hatred of monopolies is very deep in the that's one of the things they were very concerned with in the 1890s. Franklin Roosevelt had a strong antitrust enforcement regime. Democrats used to believe in that. Jimmy Carter was the last president to actually enforce antitrust law in this country. Since Reagan, though, Republicans and Democrats agreed to not enforce it any longer. And so you have these companies with the kind of power that John D. Rockefeller could only dream of, a kind of power that we don't. It boggles the mind, the sort of power that Google and Facebook, et cetera, have over our lives. Amazon, it's extraordinary. And
wasn't it Reagan that broke up AT&T into the baby bells, and also the consent decree on IBM? Is
Okay, so it sounds
that
like
Reagan? Was that Reagan or
that the AT&T thing, I believe, might have happened then. But Reagan was the one that brought in the sort of new thinking about antitrust, where it's all about consumer prices, and
Yes, yes, and I mean IBM, was
and so
a
you have this wave of consolidation, and so it's extraordinary to me that these companies are allowed to exist. But here we
and
are.
I'm with you, by the way. I think Google needs to be broken up. Amazon needs to be broken up. Microsoft needs to be broken up. Um, Apple, I think, is in a different category, but they need to be looked at. But there's too much power concentrated in too many places.
Right. And we're discovering power over the culture, over how we here in COVID, how do we talk to each other? Well, the newspaper industry is dying.
Dead.
There's it turns out social media is how we talk to each other now, and these guys have a complete stranglehold on the way we.
And you mentioned this in your Guardian column, which I do. We are going to put a link up to that at richardhelppie.com. And again, it's a catchy title, and I know even if you didn't write it, I take credit for it. It's really good. Liberals want to blame right-wing misinformation for our problems. Period. Get real. Period.
Yeah.
And you made mention of debunking and shushing and censoring. All tools for the same end. You made mention.
But debunking is what I do. That's what people like me do. We use reason. We make arguments. Yes. I mean, that's my whole life. If I didn't believe in the power of argument, I wouldn't have done what I've done. I started my own magazine. I studied and studied. I write and write and write. The whole point of everything I've done in life is to persuade people, to try to convey information. If I thought that the way you do this is by pressing the mute button, build a monopoly and then use your monopoly power to force people to shut up. That is so contrary to anything that people like me believe in.
I'm more than 100% with you on that. To me, it's more dialogue, more facts. And so I read the Georgia SB 202 and I read HR 1. Okay, which John Sarbanes.
Wow, wrote. You were way ahead of me on these.
Yeah, I'm nerdy like that. Okay, what can I tell you? And then I started seeing the reports come out, and I go, well, that's patently false. Remember, and it reminds me of the Maxwell Smart School of Logic, right? Well, you can't give a person water in line. Actually, you can. Okay, it's just like every other. All right, well, would you believe absentee ballots are going to be restricted? Well, they're actually not. Okay, well, would you believe? And it goes on. And then the narrative changes until people are exhausted. And then there's another breaking news story. And
are you familiar with the work of Mr. Matt Taibbi?
Matt was on my show.
Oh, okay. So this is what he writes about.
Matt, I believe, is a fantastic writer. I wish more people would listen to Matt Taibbi and read his writings. And like yourself, you didn't talk about this much, but my sense, and I know for sure from Matt, that his friends on the left, when he broke liberal doctrine, they went a little berserk on him.
Well, I think I don't know what it is, but that did happen to me, and I was surprised by that because I thought that what I was saying in the Guardian was like, I'm just reminding my fellow liberals of the way we have always been, who we are, what we stand for. The free speech, First Amendment, that is central to us. And I put that up on, on Facebook and Twitter, and I was astonished at how much pushback I got and how strongly my erstwhile friends disliked what I was saying. I mean, really surprised, because this seemed to me like I was making, it seemed like a straightforward no-brainer argument to me. And instead, the funny thing is, people say, I didn't have too many people deny that this is happening. I thought that's what people would say. It's like, no way, Frank, you've lost it. This is not taking place. There is no censorship regime. Instead, people are saying, basically, we've got the power. We should use it.
Yeah, exactly. And
I just couldn't believe that.
I had a gentleman on my show from named Stuart Taylor, as a group called Princetonians for Free Speech, and going at the speech codes on campus and getting support, because that is an area that got out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, to me, a big leap. If someone says, well, you know what, if we can control what you can say on a college campus, then why not? We've got these tools, we can control what's said on Facebook and Twitter and the like. And also, I hear a legitimate argument about deliberate misinformation and disinformation.
Oh yeah, well that's where this all comes from. It's a 80th ripple of Russiagate. You know, it's like and that's sort of one of the things that annoys me about this, because I can see the same impulse in it, which is, I mean, they're right. The Russians did buy a lot of misleading ads on Facebook. Yes,
yeah, but if you look at what was spent.
I know. It's infinitesimal. But here's the thing, Rich. Our entire culture is based on stuff like that. Remember, my first book was about the advertising industry.
Yes,
I'm here to tell you, they mislead people constantly. It's what they do. Or you look at Hollywood, you know, which that's how we get our historical information. It's not by reading books like mine. It's by watching movies. Well, you know, and it's like, that's not really what happened in World War II. You know, what they say in these movies, that's not really what happened.
No, it's not. And this is why I think that, and I'm an eternal optimist, I'll tell you that I look at these platforms and it lets a person like me read legislation, invite a guest like you to come on, and we can talk about real things. And I've put forward, with the help of my guests, real policy solutions for some of the issues of the day. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they're frameworks. And if you ask the question, is it better than what we're getting from the people we elect, that is hire to actually think about these things and come up with a solution? It's a resounding yes. I mean, I was just on Anthony Scaramucci's program called Mooch FM, and he said, okay, give me 2 policies. And I went through healthcare.
Well, what did you say?
Firearms. I went through, healthcare. I've had, if you count me as a healthcare knowledgeable person, we've had 6 healthcare knowledgeable people. We all agree. I've got one guy coming from like libertarian, another guy from, public health perspective, all vectoring in. We all agree on what the solution looks like. Mm-hmm. It's not rocket science. And it's, but I think one of the lines in your book, you said, we reformed healthcare without troubling the big pharma and private insurance.
Well, that's Obamacare.
You nailed it. By the way, I read the Obamacare bill because that was part of my job.
That's what you do.
Yes, indeed. Well, I did. I had a healthcare consulting business too. So, but you nailed it. And those are the 2 bad actors in this. And pharma is in a different category than private insurance, but the notion that you get your health care from your employer maybe made sense, maybe, to my grandfather who worked for Chrysler Corporation for 40 years. Okay.
Yeah.
But now you're talking about a gig economy, and you're talking about employers that are really sophisticated about how to not have to give you health care. It makes 0 sense, but guess what? If your employer gives you health care, you don't pay any taxes on that. And, we used to have company cars. That was a benefit. Why don't you see those anymore? Because IRS said, guess what? If you get a car from your employer, that's income.
Yeah.
People quit.
That's right. They changed the tax code back in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. And in firearms, the short version, again, I listen to Mooch FM, or I cover this on other podcasts. Everything else that's dangerous or requires skill, you have to go through, like driver's licenses. You don't go from, here's your first license, drive a semi, a pilot. You don't get your private pilot license, and now you're driving an airliner. You can't get a fireworks license unless you show how to operate them and how to store them. Medical practice the same way. But with firearms, you can take an 18-year-old in a lot of states, walk into a gun store, walk out with a semi-automatic rifle and 1,000 rounds. First time they ever bought a gun. Now, can we all agree that's just like crazy? We don't want to do that. But, but we also, we do have a Second Amendment, and there's a way to get there with people getting, progressively better at that. You get a call today from the Republican Party, and they say, "Tell us what to do." What do you tell them?
Oh my God. I don't know. The Republicans are they're fascinating because all my life that's been the party of big business, big money, and all of a sudden here they aren't anymore, and they don't know what to do. They're lost. They're casting about trying to figure out their new purpose.
Yeah, so they're coming to you and saying, "Hey, we're casting about, we're lost.
Yeah.
Give it to me in 3 bullet points. Do A, B, and C. What do you do?"
They should have I think if Trump had run on universal health care in 2020, he would have won. I think they should become the party of universal health care. I mean, look, follow their voters. Universal health care, strong unions, and stop trying to they should completely drop all of their voter suppression stuff and do the opposite. Try to get everybody to vote.
Okay, great. All right, you get a call today. The
Democrats.
Democratic Party says, "Hey, we got a really old guy in office. We've got some majorities. What do we do?"
Democrats, it's much simpler. So what I said about the Republicans, that's never going to happen ever in a million years. But with the Democrats, they could reform the Democratic Party really easily. And that is, commission inside a party commission to look into where they went wrong, what the hell happened. Study their own history, investigate how they went wrong and how they're going to remedy it, how they're going to rebuild their bridges with the people that you and I grew up among, and how they're going to become the majority party of Franklin Roosevelt again, because it wouldn't be that hard to do, but they would have to kiss all that Wall Street money goodbye. That would have to go. But and all that big pharma money and their great friendships with the guys from
that would be a
Valley.
Thing. Yeah, guys, hey, quit taking money from those people and start legislating for the common man.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, believe me, the political rewards for that are enormous. Roosevelt's Democratic Party, they held the majority in the House of Representatives from 1930 until 1994, with only 2 brief interruptions. They were always the majority party in this country. That's the world you and I grew up in. Well, they can be that again. I mean, whoever captures that, that sort of populist spirit, that's going to be the majority party. And it's funny, right now, both parties want that, and they talk it and they reach out to it. And both parties have this anti-populist wing also that wants to suppress voting or censor conversations, so they're both pulling in both directions at the same time. I wonder which one's going to do it. It's possibly neither.
Yeah. Well, and look, I'm 100% with you. And I've said this on many occasions. A strategy that relies on turnout or a low turnout, to me, is anathema to what we need to become as a country.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we've also shown too that you don't necessarily need to take big money. I mean, Trump, didn't in his first run because you can reach audiences. It's a lot.
Well, he was a media creation. He's people will be writing about his victory forever, but the Hillary outraised and outspent him 2-1.
Yeah.
Biden, it was a little different this year, 2020, because Trump was obviously the incumbent, but Biden still outraised and outspent him. It wasn't quite 2-1, but it was substantial. And Biden specifically outraised him from Wall Street, Silicon Valley, pharma, the commanding heights of the economy, Hollywood. Yeah. The people who matter. Who did Trump have in his corner? He had big oil. He had casinos. He had these sort of.
I have a friend of mine that thinks that that the left's aiming at big oil because that's the last bastion on the right. I mean, I'm not endorsed. I'm just relaying. Let me ask you this, Tom, if you had to advise the news outlets, either whether it's cable or the legacy broadcasters or the former print media, what would you tell them to do?
So unfortunately, Rich, this is a question that where any answer I would propose or any suggestion I would propose would be by definition wrong, because they've got this. You talk to Matt Taibbi, this is his theory. They've got they've got it figured out. Everybody has become Fox News. Everybody has become, politics for entertainment, getting outraged at one another as a form of entertainment. And I hate it. And I hate what it's doing to us. as a society.
Well, I think a lot of people have.
Wait, one more. I bet you have seen the Fox News effect on people when they when they discover it and how it changes their personality. And I've seen that, and it's disturbing. And now MSNBC and CNN, they're doing the same thing.
Precisely, same formula.
And it's I hate it, but it's, for them, by their standards, this is a winner. They've got a lot more viewers now than they did a few years ago.
Yeah, it's the outrage centers, and I think that just like you and I find that repulsive, that I think enough people say, you know what, we know we're getting played, and we need to be able to have honest reporting and like, look, what's in the bill. And that's the thing I keep asking people every time someone tells you dislike this or dislike that or hate this person or hate that person. It's like, okay, stop. What's in the bill? Yeah. Okay, we're about to look at an infrastructure bill. We're going to be talking to Professor Rick Geddes from Cornell University, who's going to break down what's in the bill. The president needs to say what's in it that's not really infrastructure. Okay. All right, Tom, you've been a great guest, and I apologize that we've gone over. I could hope that you'll agree to come back at some time.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be glad to.
That's great. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that we perhaps should have discussed, or is there any closing thoughts that you have?
Well, not really. I think this is a wonderful conversation, and I really like the sort of the core idea of your show, which is that ultimately we have to live with each other. This is a democracy, and we have to get along with one another. And I want to just echo a statement that you made at the very start of the show. This country is filled with fundamentally decent people. And that's the core value of populism, is that we like the people. I took my title, The People Know, from a famous book from the 30s by a guy called Carl Sandburg. Carl Sandburg, another great Chicagoan, he wrote something called The People Yes. And it's a celebration of the American vernacular and of ordinary Americans and how we talk to each other. And it's a very 1930s thing to celebrate ordinary Americans. And I feel like nowadays we are doing the opposite in this country. We are denouncing ordinary Americans.
Yes.
And we think that they're diseased in some way, and that they're psychologically, that there's some pathology has got them. And I just want to say, I still believe in the people. Yes, I still believe in ordinary Americans. And I think that's very close to who we are when we can actually talk to each other in a normal way, not screaming and not social media and that sort of thing.
And look, I think your historical perspective is a great step in that direction. We talk about the deliberate attempt to divide us black versus white, and that same model being applied. And I know you said,
the politically, it's just crazy what's going on now.
And I know you said that your book, The People Know, is your last political book. I hope you mean it's your most recent, because I think you've got a lot of gas in your tank, and I know I would sure love to hear more from you, and I'm sure our readers will too.
All right. Well, we shall see. We shall see about that.
All right. This is Rich Helppie signing off on The Common Bridge, where we talk about the issues of the day, the opportunities of the moment, and the policy solutions that can help us address them. We've been with our guest, Thomas Frank. So long, till next time.
Thank you for watching Richard Helppie's Common Bridge. Please click the subscribe button below. Also, tune into our podcast, Richard Helppie's Common Bridge, on Apple, iHeart, Amazon, and others. Also, be sure to visit us online at richardhelppie.com.